Hi, I'm Carrie and thank you for joining me on Puzzle Kinder. Today what I'm wanting to talk about is the highly sensitive child versus the autistic child. And the reason for this topic right at the beginning of this passion project was it was something that I struggled with as a mom. My daughter is Asperger's, and if you know anything about autism, you'll know it's a spectrum disorder. That's why we use the term ASD, autism spectrum disorder, because on the one end of the spectrum is the highly functioning autistic child. We call that Asperger's, and this person would be a level 1 because they need less support on the spectrum. And then you move to the low functioning autism, LFA. They're a level 3. That's because they require far more support. And so our daughter, when we eventually got her diagnosed, we realized that she had Asperger's, very high functioning with ADHD. But when she was young, we just put it down to her being highly sensitive. She had a lot of highly sensitive traits, which is then hard to differentiate. The traits of an autistic child and a highly sensitive child often overlap, especially if your child is Asperger's, especially if they're high functioning. So for example, when she was a baby, she was very tactile sensitive. If we put her on the grass, she would often cry, or noises overhead, she would cover her ears, or in a big crowd, she'd be bothered by noises. She was also sensitive when it came to eating, quite a fussy eater. So she either wanted crunchy foods or soft foods. When we went to the lake and she got sand on her feet, she wanted it washed off. She didn't like the feeling. Very sensitive to touch, tactile sensitive, very sensitive in general. Her senses, she was highly sensitive, even hypersensitive. Couldn't handle pain as well, had a low pain threshold. And other traits of highly sensitive kids are often, they're more emotional. Highly sensitive kids tend to be more intuitive. They tend to ask a lot of deep questions. They tend to be quite articulate, be able to ask deep questions. They are empathetic. They also notice subtleties, often when something's moved, for example. They generally don't like change. They prefer rituals. They prefer quiet play. They also are tactile sensitive, so they get bothered by scratchy clothing and, as I mentioned, loud noises. So we notice a lot of these traits in our daughter. And then when I was pregnant with my twin boys, we went to the hospital, and the doctor that eventually delivered my twin boys, my babies, he had some contact with my daughter, Audrey, and he then came to me and he said, Mrs. Langer, I've had a chat with Audrey and she's so sweet, and he really seemed to understand her so well right from the get-go. And he said, you know, she reminds me of my son. He's 4 years old. He has autism. So that was the first time that I'd heard autism along with the word Audrey, you know. And he did recommend a book that I read. I can even recommend that to you if you're interested. It's called The Highly Sensitive Child by Elaine N. Aron. And it gives you insights into highly sensitive children and how to go about interacting with them, how to work with them, because highly sensitive children can so easily be crushed because they experience things so deeply. They've got a rich inner life, and it's about how to discipline these kids. It's about how to encourage these kids. It's about how to give you strategies with how to really enable your child to flourish. So I do recommend this book. I will put it in the link below, which you can click on. Even if you found out eventually that your child is autistic and they are hypersensitive or highly sensitive, I would recommend this book because they're wonderful protocols to follow to enable your child to flourish. That's a good book to get started with. And so then my daughter went off to kindergarten, to nursery school at 3, which is a requirement here in Germany. And I noticed that she didn't play with the kids. She didn't even really play next to the kids. She didn't know any of the kids' names. When I would come pick her up from the playground, she would always be playing around the periphery of the playground and doing something like counting something or other, counting the stones, lining things up in order. And she was quite fixated on the teacher. She would often be by the adults talking to the teachers, but she couldn't tell me any of the kids' names. Although she was someone that had a rote memory, she was very, very clever. She could just tell you sentences from movies, from series. She knew all the Paw Patrol pups' names, and she could literally just spew out dialogue from movies. And so she really was very, very smart. But when I asked her, hey, what are the names of some of the kids in your class, she couldn't tell me any of their names. And then when her classmates moved up into the next class, because they were not so small, they were now from the minis to the middies, she didn't move up with them. She wanted to stay with her teacher. She didn't know any of the kids' names, and she hadn't built any relationship to the kids. And so this was also a little bit of a concern for us, but the kindergarten leader at that time said to us, don't worry, Mrs. Langer, she is a very, very happy child, which she is, and she just prefers her own company. She'll probably be one of those people that when she gets older, she just needs a few people around her. She's just a happy, content child that doesn't need people around her. And we did start to notice, though, other tics and other behaviors that were concern for us. And she became even more fussy, even more picky as an eater, to the point where I'm going to put my hand up and just say, you know, I even force-fed her. I got so desperate because autistic children are often very fussy eaters. In fact, they say 70% of autistic children are extremely fussy eaters. That's got to do often because they're highly sensitive, they're tactile sensitive. And so the kind of foods that they would eat are very limited. It often has to be a specific brand. The texture has to be exactly as they want it. And I got desperate. I wanted her to get her nutrients in. And since then I've learned that's not the way you're going to get an autistic child to eat their foods. But we also noticed an awkward gait. So the way Audrey would move, she was not very well coordinated. We noticed as well that she had what was called facial blindness and time blindness. So she would meet people and she couldn't remember faces very well. She couldn't also differentiate between day and night so well. We also started to have more regular meltdowns and flip out. So these kids will flood easily, which means that you can't reason with them, you can't negotiate with them. They become completely overwhelmed. She would also do this even as a baby. She wanted pressure instead of a hug. And when she was then having a particularly bad day, you would give her a gentle hug and she would flip out and say, why are you touching me so hard? And sometimes her facial expressions didn't always match her what she was actually feeling or what she was saying. Other things was, of course, that she had trouble making friends. So she was not intuitive, and that wasn't developing. We really saw that was a big area where she struggled. And of course, when our boys were babies, we noticed sometimes I'd come downstairs and the babies would be crying and Audrey would be sitting there happily playing. And I would say to Audrey, why didn't you come and call me? The babies are crying. Oh, I didn't really notice. And she picked them up maybe twice when they were babies. She didn't have an interest in them particularly. She wasn't social in that way. And so these were all concerns. And she had this kind of professor language. She's always been super articulate and super clever. But what I will say is that, of course, as a parent, you focus on the strengths. And because she's an Asperger child, which we later realized, she is so strong. These kids are generally left brain dominant, more mathematical, but very, very strong. very articulate, was way ahead with certain milestones. And as a parent, that's what you want to focus on. And that's what we did focus on. And so we just thought, well, our child is just highly sensitive. But because of the Artics, and because of some of the developmental delays, my husband said, let's put a name down on the waiting list and to have an assessment done at the clinic nearby. COVID hit and we had to wait over 2 years. And I can remember before she went for the assessment, I had to take her, and I remember saying to my husband, oh, Lovey, you know, I really, she's done so well actually at kindergarten. She's been independent. She's so school ready. They told her she was ready. I don't think there's a problem. But I took her anyway, and she met with the lead psychologist and had an interview there, and she had some play, and the psychologist very quickly picked up on the fact that she was Asperger's with ADHD. Of course, there was a whole protocol that we followed. We had to fill out plenty of forms along with her teachers at kindergarten. And she was given the diagnosis. And even then I thought to myself, well, I'm not sure we're going to need it. She's just flourishing. She's doing great. And I guess for me, these behaviors almost became normal in my world. And then she hit school a few months later and the wheels fell off. I can remember the first day of school where the teacher had put symbols next to each of the kids' name, and she got a pear next to her name. And the first day of school, parents were invited to come and observe them in the classroom. She had a major meltdown. She couldn't be consoled. And it was at that point that we suddenly realized, the stress of school, and certain stresses can then cause the meltdowns and the problems to really be more evident, put it that way. And so then we had a number of meetings with the teachers, with her teacher, and brought forward the diagnosis. And since then we've put strategies together, and with some quite a lot of support, she is coping. But yes, that was the journey for us. She got diagnosed a little later than what is ideal. They say, of course, kids that are early years and early into kindergarten, that's the ideal age. And so that was my journey. And with my son Adam, he's hypersensitive, which means he's not sensitive. He's not sensitive to pain. He has been diagnosed with early childhood autism, a lower functioning autism, in that he has quite a few milestone delays. And he even had a speech delay, which Audrey did not. And he is, because he's hypersensitive, like when he eats, he stuffs everything in his mouth. He sleeps with a pressure blanket because he would roll hectically, quite violently from side to side to get himself to sleep. He would have also an awkward gait, but eye rolling, so certain tics. Both of them struggled with toilet issues. My son is still in nappies, still in diapers at the moment, because we also talk about being in touch with their bodies, and autistic kids often are not so in touch with their bodies, and that's where you get the awkward movements, and often so toilet issues are a problem. With my son, he also is quite a hectic fixator. He fixates. So since he was maybe a year old, he's been fixated on tractors. His whole world is tractors, literally his whole world. It drives us all nuts. But Audrey, because she's even got the ADHD, and because she is so smart, she will fixate on something for a period of time and then move on to the next fixation after some weeks or months. So if you think, okay, my child is highly sensitive, but could they have autism? Just a few things that I've mentioned. Autistic kids are not intuitive. That's where the social delays come in. That's where the struggles to make friends come in. So they're generally not empathetic. Look as well for the poor body posture or awkward gaits. Look for fixations and these extremely fussy eaters. Other things, for example, are the perhaps the extreme need for pressure. Another big one are the extreme meltdowns. extreme meltdowns often because these kids in some ways live in their own universe, and often they feel misunderstood. They can't express themselves in a way that people always understand. So these were a few things. The other thing that's a big one to keep an eye on is the lack of eye contact. With both of my kids, they really struggle with eye contact. And I can remember Audrey being at kindergarten day. Audrey, you need to look your teacher in the eye and you need to say goodbye. And she took me very literally, as autistic kids do. They are very literal. And she took her face in her hands and said goodbye. And we had a little laugh about it in that moment because it came across so cute and unnatural in the moment. And now I realize for an autistic child, looking someone in the eye while they talk to them and being intuitive does not come naturally. It's a learned behavior. So I have talked a lot about the highly sensitive child versus the autistic child. What I will do is put up a diagram for you just to have a look at some of those points so that you can compare. Maybe you want to take a screenshot, and hopefully that helps you to decide, is my child highly sensitive? Could they have Asperger's or autism? And what I would really recommend, if you suspect that perhaps it's worth investigating further, you could do an online autism tests. There are plenty of them out there, official ones, and you could do a quick online autism test, and that would just give you an indicator. Is it worth maybe putting my child's name down on the waiting list to get an assessment? And I would say sooner than later. And really what we're wanting our puzzle kids to do, so we want them to find their fit. So I hope that helps. I'll put up the diagram for you now, and please like, subscribe if this helps, share with someone if you think this is going to help them. And until next time, bye.